Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the President Trump's tariff policies and the recent appeal court verdict that the executive branch of government, that is the president, the executive branch of US government, does not have the authority to impose tariffs. Now, the Constitution, in essence, well, it does in essence, it does, reasonably clearly, I think, say that only the legislative branch, that is Congress, only the legislative branch can impose tariffs or otherwise manage and interfere with or direct international trade. Now, this was something that President Trump's team had already aware of. But the President Trump declared that really it was an emergency, given that America was running such a massive deficit with other countries, and that therefore it was incumbent on the office of the president to redress this emergency by placing retaliatory tariffs on other countries. Now, the president argued, or his team and advisors argued, that given these other countries were, while claiming free trade, were in fact imposing quite heavy tariffs on American goods, that the president had the authority, given the emergency, had the authority to place equivalent tariffs on those countries. Now, the globalists falsely argue, in their usual way of telling lies upon lies upon lies, that the world was free trade. Everybody was free trading except for bad Trump comes along and disrupts the free trade. The reality is there was never free trade. Every country has, whether it's tariffs or import quotas on the number of items that could be brought in, or they have various other processes for preventing free and open trade from occurring. For example, some countries there's only one port of entry where imported goods can come in, and there's only two officers work in that department, and so that the trickle of imported goods is very, very slow. That's another way that so there are various administrative and some quite deceitful actually, but various administrative measures that they use to prevent imports from coming in. And so this idea of free trade is an absolute nonsense. It's simply not happening. It doesn't happen. It's not happening. There are all sorts of tax dodges, tax incentives given to various industries, and so on. Now, President Trump proposed tariff policies that were direct. If you put tariffs on us, we'll put tariffs on you. And America is running a huge trade deficit, which it is and was. And so these tariffs were, in my view at least, quite understandable and quite reasonable. So the court has said, well, we won't order you to take the tariffs off or down, but we'll give you time. And I don't think it's a largesse of the court, by the way, but we'll give you time to take the matter to the Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, and the matter can be decided there, which I think is the appropriate place for this, given it's a nationwide and international sort of trading thing. So the argument is not does the president have the authority to impose tariffs. The Constitution says that only the legislative branch, Congress, can do that. So the argument is going to be, is the declared emergency that the president has declared, is the declared emergency a valid claim? Can the president say, well, it's emergency? Now, given the massive trade imbalance, you could argue that there is an emergency. So that, again, that's a matter for the court to determine, is there an emergency? And then the second aspect of this, how long can you use the emergency invocation of the emergency? How long is it valid? Is it valid for 30 days or 6 months or a year, or is it valid until the trade is balanced and there's an equal inflow and outflow of goods? At what point is the emergency declared to be over, assuming the Supreme Court accepts the emergency argument in the first place? My take on this, and I'm not trying to preempt what the court may or may not say. But my sort of thing on this is there was an emergency, a financial emergency of some massive proportions, by the way, and that the president, it was incumbent on the chief executive, the president, to act. Now, I don't know how long it would have taken Congress to arrive at, I mean, you can imagine debating the toing and froing. There's a lot of globalist interests, and a lot of the politicians in the Congress are owned by the globalists, lock, stock and barrel. So I would argue it was unlikely the president could have got anything meaningful through the Congress in anything like a reasonable amount of time. So, would a cut down version or would the Congress agree to anything that may interfere with the globalist project? Now, let's look at this from the other side, and this is, I think, the important bit. While the office of the president, according to the Constitution, can't interfere with global commerce and in this or commerce in totality in any meaningful way, the executive office of the president openly, in the United States for getting on for 50 years now, certainly 40 years, has brazenly and openly and aggressively promoted this free trade thing. But it was all a lie. It was a horrible, horrible lie, a multiple lie. It never was free trade. It was a case where the rich Western countries would drop their tariffs or have any restriction on goods coming in from third world countries where the wages are lower. They don't have health and safety standards or standards to do with dumping chemicals in rivers, things like that. So it's much cheaper to manufacture stuff over there. In China, they have to work 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, for fuck's sake. And, for a wage that's a tenth of, somewhere between an eighth and a tenth of what the Western wage would be. So you can obviously make things a lot cheaper over there than you can. And on top of that, the quality control standards are much lower in pretty much all things. In textiles, for example, lower quality fabrics, lower quality stitching, all sorts of things like that. Same with, not all, but many electronics. So much lower quality goods, made by, slave peasant labor. And of course, it's going to be cheaper. I mean, what do you think? Now, but those jobs, capital jobs, technology was shipped out of the West, the United States in this instance, was shipped out of the United States and just sent to all these third world countries. So Americans lost their jobs. Americans had lower standard of living. Americans had, and because there weren't money-making investment opportunities in innovation and manufacturing and production, that sort of thing, the investment paradigm switched into things like real estate and so on, so that the price of day-to-day living increased out of sight, whereas the means to deal with those cost of living increases, well-paying jobs and so on, were all shipped offshore. So American presidents and the executive branch, were brazenly and openly and aggressively supporting this, and Congress never stopped them. There were no court cases to say, well, the president can't do that. So we've got Western leaders, the president in this case, aggressively sending American jobs and technology and manufacturing and whatnot out of America. But no one was stopping that. Nobody was against that. That was all, oh yeah, this is all good. Whereas when American goods and services to be sold to those countries, they had super high tariffs and import quotas and all sorts of restrictions. So American goods couldn't be sold, or Western goods, but American goods in this case couldn't be sold in those places, like China or wherever. So this is and also the purchasing power of people that are on much lower wages. They couldn't afford a lot of American or Western goods. To the same mass consumption extent that was possible in the West. So why is it okay for the executive to give away American jobs and American factories and American production and American standards? Why is it okay for the president to do that, But when the president now wants to say, no, I'm going to do something about that, but oh no, that's unconstitutional. Why wasn't it unconstitutional to give away American jobs in the first place? So that's, I think, a discussion that really needs to be had. What the president of the United States, elected by the American people, was solely focused on giving away American jobs and standards of living, and that was considered okay. Nobody was stopping that. So that's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. So the definition, I think, needs to be codified. Same as I've argued for the codification of why judges should recuse themselves, stand down from legal cases where they have a conflict of interest. That is vital for the functioning of the legal system, and that has to be clearly, in my view, clearly codified. And the same goes here for the president declaring, an emergency in this case, trade, an emergency. What is the emergency? Let's define emergency, clearly define it in the case of trade, for example, and then let's clearly define how long an emergency can last for. For example, say the emergency in trade is until the inflow and outflow of trade value is roughly similar. Is that the end? Or does the president get 12 months to take remedial action, but after that he has to go to Congress for approval to continue the emergency? Or should Congress approve the placing of tariffs at all? Or instead of tariffs, should the president have the power to place import quotas on things so that only a certain limited number or certain dollar value, or, for example, of items can be imported in from those countries? Or is the emergency only, if, for example, applies, when they drop all their tariffs, we'll drop ours? Is that the end of the emergency? That if all tariffs are gone, both trade going both ways. I mean, if all tariffs are gone, then is that the end of the emergency? So there needs to be, I believe, a definition of what an emergency is and for how long it can go, and what would be, in terms of codification, what would be the end of that emergency? What would be the end game, the end goal, the measuring criteria? But I don't know where this is going to go. This legal uncertainty, of course, will cause a lot of companies that may be thinking of locating their factories back in the United States, or investing in factories, or expanding their factories and their manufacturing capability. They may now tread water, thinking, well, we don't know which way this is going to go, so why don't we hesitate over this and wait until there's a determination made by the Supreme Court. If I was a CEO looking at investing gazillions, I would want the legal sort of landscape to be clear and finished and finalized, but before I started throwing the shareholders' money in all directions. But that's not a concern these CEOs had when they were giving away American jobs and giving away manufacturing to third world countries. They certainly weren't thinking about that. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.